The Books Podcast, presented by Tim Hague.
Welcome to the Books Podcast. I'm Tim Hague. Now, as you know, we like to cover a pretty wide waterfront and a kaleidoscopic variety of authors, scientists, historians, journalists, politicians, the lot. Do check out our back catalogue and subscribe, it's free. We also love to meet our favourite novelists, and in this episode, we're very happy to welcome Eleni Kyriacou to Books Podcast.
Joan Crawford, her background was so poor, her teeth were rotten. Cary Grant came from a very poor background and invented Cary Grant. Famous quote about nobody wants to be Cary Grant more than I do. All the women could be targeted, any woman. It didn't have to just be a film star, just anyone with a pulse, anyone with a pair of legs was considered fair game.
I ask you, gentlemen of the jury, is this the kind of book you'd like your wives and servants to read?
Eleni, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, the book is, and I've got it right here, it's A Beautiful Way to Die. And I'm going to quote the strapline because it's fab. It tells you, it really does fix it for us. You're either born a star or you'd kill to be one. So it's a novel about crimes and scandals in Hollywood in 1953 and also the UK. You bring us to the UK as well. But why are we in Hollywood and Ealing in 1950? Why does that era exercise your imagination? Because your earlier book, The Unspeakable Acts of Zina Pavlou, was also set in the 50s. Why does that get your juices going?
It's interesting because the 50s for me seem so evocative of a time that we think of as really glamorous, but actually is also quite dangerous. My parents came from Cyprus to London in the 1950s, and they met here, and I always thought that was quite a brave thing to do. And looking back on it, if they'd taken a wrong step, it could have also been quite dangerous. And I'm just intrigued by that idea of something that seems so beautiful and glamorous like the 50s movies, but also behind the scenes of Hollywood, terrible things happening in a really seedy, corrupt world.
No, you said somewhere you've said you wrote this book so you could watch a lot of films. Is that a big thing of yours?
I do love films. I've always loved films. And growing up, I watched lots of black and white movies. I also loved film stars like Liz Taylor, Bette Davis, Cary Grant. So I just grew up with that whole thing of films. And my parents always loved older movies as well. So, yeah. And also the reason I wrote it and set it in Hollywood was my previous book, The Unspeakable Acts of Zina Pavlou, was set in Holloway Prison. And while that had, it was very dark and corrupt as a setting, I thought, I want to write something a bit more glamorous. So I thought, where could I set the next one? So I went for Hollywood. Of course, it is still dark and corrupt, but at least I get a chance to describe all the Hollywood parties and there is an enormous amount of glamour. Well, we're going to talk about your characters, about your glamorous film stars in a moment. I want to start off with that title. A Beautiful Way to Die is a brilliant title for the book. I wondered if that was a film, and I Googled it. And what did you find?
I was sent straight to The Samaritans.
Yes, this is what happened when I Googled
it. A little message saying, don't do it.
Yeah, when we thought of it as a title. There is some stuff on YouTube that uses that phrase, but it's not. What I wanted to do was, with that title, what we were trying to do as a team here was to sort of evoke an idea of the glamour, but also the danger, like I said. So to show that it is a crime novel, but the setting obviously is very seductive and shiny and glamorous.
You're awfully good on film titles. I mean, you've invented some. Actually, there was a film in the 60s called A Lovely Way to Die, Kirk Douglas.
Oh, okay, I don't know that.
We did a little bit of digging.
I'm going to have to look that one up now.
When I got past The Samaritans. But you've got other film, Witness Unknown, Kill Me Again, When Love Comes to Town. I made a note of some of them. These sound just right. You made those up.
I made them up.
Right.
This is what happens when you spend far too much time watching films. You sort of that's where your head lives. And yes, I made them up, and I think I did. I'm pretty sure I did Google all of them to make sure that they weren't actual films. But yeah, I did make those titles
because
up.
It's not actually a roman à clef. It refers to quite a lot of scandals and things in Hollywood at the time. But it's not about specific.
No, but the crimes and misdemeanors that take place in this book have all on some level happened.
We'll come back to that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some of the lead characters. There are 4 or 5 main characters. One of them is a gorgeous film star called Max Whitman. Tell me about him.
Max is, imagine Brad Pitt in the film Babylon, so a very beautiful man in his 40s who can have anyone and do anything. The character that I wrote is at that point where he's achieved a lot, but he's wary and he's vulnerable and he's worried. Is he still going to stay relevant? Is he still going to get the big movies that he wants? At the moment, he has a lot of power, but whether that he'll keep that.
And indeed, at risk of spoilers, he does win the Oscar in 1953 in this book, which would be a disappointment to William Holden.
I did look that
Of course he did. But he'll have to live without it. So Max has ambitions. He wants to be a more important film actor than he has been. Even though he's the biggest star in the studio.
He's the biggest star, but the thing is, he, alongside with his ex-wife, Stella Hope, they were the golden Hollywood couple. So after they've split up, and so they are more powerful together than they are apart. And he's aware of that. So he quickly wants to associate himself with another leading lady or to get a young ingenue coming along who he can kind of nurture and so that he can retain that crown that he once had.
So we meet Ginny.
Yes.
He meets a woman called Ginny. Well, let's talk about her. Where does she fit in?
So Ginny is English and she won a beauty pageant and...
Did that sort of thing really happen?
I invented that,
right,
but
okay.
perhaps it did. Perhaps it did. And her prize was to come to Hollywood and to win an audition. That was all she got. She wasn't going to get a ticket back. She wasn't going to get anything else. So she's in her early 20s and she's wide-eyed and she's quite idealistic about Hollywood. But then as she gets talking to other up-and-coming actresses, she realises that it is quite a precarious place to be if you're a young woman who is ambitious and there are lots of people around who are going to take advantage of you. So she does a screen test and meets Max, and they sort of get together.
And again, we risk spoilers, but it's quite early in the book. He sort of summons her to he's got an apartment in Sunset Towers or something, and he summons her to dinner late at night. Now, any self-aware young woman in those days would have understood what that meant, wouldn't they?
Well, possibly. I mean, there's the part of you that thinks he obviously is after sex, and then there's the other part of you that thinks this is the biggest film star. Am I going to say no? And actually, in that scene, all they do is talk about her ambitions and their careers and what they could do together, and nothing else happens between them during that scene.
Okay. Now, you said that Max was married to, but separated from, there's a film star called Stella Hope. Now, her we meet in Ealing, in London. What's she doing there?
Well, she's there because she has fallen out with Max and they've got divorced. And then after they agreed to separate, they both happened to be in a car crash together and he came out of it much worse. So they'd separated, he's in a car crash, and then she sort of makes sure he's okay, and then she still leaves him, which is unforgivable in the eyes of Hollywood and in the eyes of their fans. And so her popularity is on the wane. So she's been sort of sidelined. She's been sort of pushed to Ealing Studios in London.
They've sort of lent out.
Yeah, studios would often borrow stars from other studios, and the stars who had the contracts really didn't have any say in it. Very occasionally someone might dig their heels in, but it was very difficult to say no if you were under one of those contracts.
Now, Stella's an interesting character. Stella Hope is not her real name, it's her Hollywood name. Her real name is Kristalla Petrakis. She's a Cypriot. Because one of the things I liked about Stella, one of the things I thought you did rather well is the extent to which she's, as it were, bought in to her new persona. She's, Stella Hope is a film star. And our Stella, who was once Christella, she never uses that name anymore, or just once, I think, when she's talking to herself in the mirror. But she thinks of herself. It's a sort of, that sort of Cliff Richard, Elton John thing, where Harry Webb has become a different person and has bought in. And that's what you meant, isn't it? She is attached to
I think all the stars then were manufactured, regardless of where they were from. So, for example, Joan Crawford came from very, very poor background, had lots of dental work because her background was so poor, her teeth were rotten, and she's famously completely reconstructed the way she looked. And if you look at the backgrounds of a lot of the movie stars, I mean, Cary Grant came from a very poor background and invented Cary Grant. And there's some famous quote about nobody wants to be Cary Grant more than I do, so that's Archie Leach, really. Mm-hmm. So I think all our Hollywood stars that we look at from those days, they're not who they seem to be. Very few of them are really who they seem to be. And that is what I was trying to do with Stella, and also with Ginny, the ingenue, the younger actress on the way up. She, at the very beginning, she goes for an audition and she's told by the head of the studio, you've got something, but we'll need to change your hair, and we've got to change your eyebrows, and you have a gap in your front teeth, we'll fix that, and we'll change your name as well, by the way. So it wasn't uncommon. It was a star factory. That's what they called the studios, and because they produced who they wanted to.
Now, Stella has a problem because she receives unwelcome mail while she's already in London. And how far are we prepared to open that one up?
We can talk about that because it's at the beginning of the book. So Stella is in the makeup chair and gets in Ealing Studios and is handed a letter from the postboy comes and gives her a letter, and she opens it, and inside there is a blackmail note demanding money.
A lot of money. It's $50,000.
$50,000 then, which would have been a lot. She's very wealthy, don't forget. She's super wealthy. But anyway, that was...
She doesn't want to give the money.
A lot of money, a lot of hard-earned money, because she came from nothing. And also in the envelope is a tiny black and white photo taken years ago of a young woman in a compromising situation without any clothes on, and she recognises it as herself. Now, it wasn't unheard of then for women to do what's known as French photos, which are really soft porn photographs, and they might get $30, $40 for them, something like that, in order to make ends meet while they were waiting for a studio contract, while they were waiting to do some work. Marilyn Monroe's photos were found and published, and it happens. People's past comes up once they're famous. So that's what I was doing with that idea. And the blackmailer is counting on her paying up. But of course, he doesn't know her that well because she's not going to pay up.
She's got a bit more grit to her.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Now, one more major character is Maggie, who is Stella meets at this time. Again, I'm going to invite you. Tell who's Maggie? Maggie
is around about Stella's age, about 40, and she is a makeup artist. And she's doing quite well for herself. She's just managed to get the powers that be at Ealing to let her do her own jobs. Back then, a lot of the makeup artists were men, and if women did the work, they often weren't credited on the film. So for her, it's a major coup. And she's a big fan of Stella Hopes. She sees an opportunity to help her when she has a screen test very early one morning that no one else wants to get up to do, and so she volunteers to go along and do her makeup, and they quickly become really good friends. But there's more to Maggie than meets the eye.
Of course. Well, there would more or less have to be.
There has to be.
For the book to unfold. But it does start off as this relationship where Maggie then becomes very important to Stella. Stella starts to depend on her.
Maggie, the thing is with Stella's fame, Stella has the kind of fame. She's been famous for about 20 years. She doesn't know who her real friends are, and she's quite private, and she has, apart from her husband, she hasn't really allowed herself to get close to anyone. But then along comes Maggie, who seems to understand her, understands her vulnerabilities, understands what she needs from her, and is also a great makeup artist. So she quickly employs her as a sort of a personal assistant, confidant, which isn't unusual in those days. Quite often movie stars, their best friends might have been their hairdressers or their stylists or, the people that they're surrounded with that they can really trust. So they become really good friends.
I was very intrigued in where Maggie is living, because it's a real place.
Yes, I've been there, yeah.
So I want to hear about that.
It's
because
an amazing place.
You evoke it extremely well. You're awfully good with real locations.
Thank you.
And we might want to do more. But tell me about this place, because I didn't know about it, and it's still there, right?
Yeah, it's still there and people live there. It's called Ealing Village, and it's a beautiful Art Deco sort of style residence. It's a complex. Originally, it was built in the 30s, and it was meant to be for the movie stars of Ealing Studios, somewhere for them to live. But the movie stars didn't want to live there. They all wanted to live in the West End of London, to be near the nightclubs and the bars and all the exciting things. So what happened was the technical staff at Ealing Studios ended up living there instead, in these little apartments. And if you go online, you can look, they're often up for sale. It is quite an unusual place. It is beautiful. And I think it has a real community spirit.
This takes us back to this notion that you're not doing a roman à clef, but you are referencing real things. And in order to avoid any spoilers, because we have a woman in a sanatorium who we don't know who it is, and she doesn't know who she is either. And I don't really want to spoil any of the stuff that goes on there, but there are real Hollywood events. If you tell me what happened to one or two of the real Hollywood figures, like Gene Spengler and Peg Entwistle, tell me about these people. And you've got an appendix in the book,
yes,
which will give us an idea of what happened to the characters in your book.
So Gene Spengler was an actress, a young actress, who had a bit part in a film with the very big movie star Kirk Douglas. And the film ended, they wrapped, and then a few days later, she just went missing. No one knew where she was. I think a relative of hers came to town to find her, couldn't find her. And then her purse, as in her handbag, was found in Griffith Park, and in it was a note. And the note said, Kirk, I've gone to Dr. Scott. I think it best while Mother's away. So that was publicised, and Kirk Douglas, of his own accord, went to the police and said, I'm not the Kirk in this note. I don't know this woman. I've never met her before. But then it was pointed out to him that he did know her because he'd been in a film. So a little while later, he came back and said, I was in Palm Springs at the time, so I've no idea what happened to her. So no one knows what happened to Jean. She's never been found. She's one of the sort of lost women of Hollywood, and there are many of them.
Well, yeah, tell me about Peg Entwistle.
Peg Entwistle, really tragically, Hollywood is full of women and men who never make it. It's a town full of people that are desperate for fame or desperate to have a career in film, and it never happens for them. And Peg is one of those people. She made one film, and then she couldn't get parts or things weren't going right for her. She was desperate. She climbed to the top of the letter H in the Hollywood sign and threw herself off. And I think she was 24. And so she's known as the Hollywood girl. And that story's, been depicted in films and books. But that's really sad. That sort of shows a desperation for fame. And what I was trying to do with this book was to show how far will people go to be famous, but then also how far will they go to hang on to that fame.
Yeah, you reference Frances Farmer as well, and then you've got a great quote. You say, because Frances Farmer was committed to a sanatorium.
Yes.
Not in different circumstances, but in the same way as the woman in your book.
Yes.
And you say, she wasn't insane; she was just badly behaved.
Yeah, you see, there's another part of the book that says, Hollywood doesn't like badly behaved women unless they're on the screen, and I think to some extent that's still true. I do believe that's still true.
Well, I wanted to ask you about how much things have changed, because we've got Ginny getting involved with Max, and it does get involved. It
Yes.
does become an affair. We have to admit that. She's, I mean, in a way, she's up for it.
Yeah.
She says there are worse things than being propositioned by the biggest star in the studio. But it's still transactional as far as he's concerned, and she thinks he's in love with him. But in a way, is it what I'm getting at is it worse if it's Harvey Weinstein than if it's Brad Pitt who's taking advantage
I think
of you?
the fact is it's about power, so both are equally bad. So it's about someone. So the book is set against the backdrop of the casting couch and sort of Me Too before it was known as Me Too. But it's about people in power exploiting those who don't have power. And so that's what we're looking at. And obviously, to a point, someone might think, oh, well, if I go for dinner with this person, then, maybe I'll get the part or whatever. But forcing someone to do something they don't want to is obviously completely wrong. So I don't feel that we've moved on as much as we'd like to think we have. I mean, if you think of all the crimes that were described during the Harvey Weinstein case, I just think that sense of desperate women and badly behaved men is still there,
It seems to me that nothing had changed.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it has a little bit now because we've finally come to a sense of the horror of it. But until really very recently, women were still being expected to do things that they shouldn't have to do and to sell themselves for professional advancement.
Yeah, and I read something about Ealing Studios, and they were saying that all the women could be targeted, any woman. It didn't have to just be a film star, just anyone with a pulse, anyone with a pair of legs was considered fair game. So, like I described Maggie saying in the book, our makeup artist, it doesn't matter whether you're working in the kitchen or whether you're behind the cameras or you're doing makeup or hair, you were considered someone that, could be approached. And, the idea that you might say no was just unheard of, really.
And of course, Maggie's not a teenager. She's a grown woman. She's
no.
not. I mean, she's presumably in her 30s or maybe
she's in her early 40s, like
and still subject to that.
Yeah,
and still
it doesn't
junior.
make a difference on age because it's about power. It's not about anything else, really. It's very much about power. I read quite a few biographies while researching this book, and Joan Collins has written many great biographies. My favourite one was called Behind the Shoulder Pads, and she talks about working at Ealing Studios, and she also talks about movie stars that would just go one step too far, which I've sort of depicted in the book.
Yes, indeed. Well, again, we're not going to detail it, but there are moments when even Stella is subject, who's a big star, who is subjected to certain kinds of abuse that she shouldn't have to. If we're talking about power in Hollywood, then we need to talk about Stan Fisher. Is he based on anybody in particular, or is he just a
He's a sort of combination of people, but there were people in the 50s called they were studio fixers, they're executive producers or executive managers rather, and one in particular was called Eddie Mannix, and he's really well known. He was at MGM. There was another one called Howard Strickling at MGM, and their job was really to keep their stars out of the newspapers if there was anything untoward. So if their stars did anything, got into trouble, committed crimes, were seen in an unfavourable light, they would pay off the newspapers, pay off the cops, and as if it never happened. They were very powerful men.
There's a big set piece. There are lots of set pieces. There's a big set piece of a Hollywood party in the book.
Yes.
Which again you clearly enjoyed doing.
Yeah, I loved writing that.
And there's an elephant at this party, which I mean, is that a real event? In that film Babylon, you mentioned earlier
I
on,
have to say I watched that film 3 times, which is possibly 3 times too many.
Because it's that party, isn't it?
It is kind of the idea, but the idea of those parties as well is at the very beginning we go to a party with Ginny and she sees it and it's mad, it's excessive, it's exciting, and she just takes it all and thinks, wow, this is just the wildest party. And then when things start sliding for her and things start happening. She goes to another party and she sees the dark side of those parties and how difficult they can be and how transactional they are and how sordid they can really be. And I think they're all those things. It just depends where you're looking, really.
And indeed, because again, that's what you do. The second big party, she sees it from the other side.
Exactly, yeah.
She sees the meat grinder and the women who are not necessarily being prostituted, but exploited.
Yeah, I mean, there were people that were brought in, quite often a coachload of women who were dancers or bit actresses would be brought in for entertainment. And then that idea of what is entertainment, are you going there to dance? The idea was, you might get $7 and a hot meal, but are you going there to dance or are you going there and you'll be expected to have sex with someone? And very often, you didn't really have a choice. Once you sign up, you're there.
It's sort of Jeffrey Epstein's territory.
Yeah, and it was, the women were desperate and terrible things did happen.
Well, terrible things happen, but it's a great ride to find out.
Thank
about
you.
I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you so much.
So that's Eleni Kyriacou, A Beautiful Way to Die. If you enjoyed this interview, please subscribe for free on your favourite podcast player to be notified of upcoming episodes. For the next show, we'll be talking to Thomas Levinson about So Very Small, a wonderfully lucid history of germ theory. It's more fun than it sounds. Eleni, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having me.
That was the Books Podcast, presented by Tim Hague. Email Tim on tim@bookspodcast.com, Twitter @bookspodcast, and Facebook @bookspodcasttim.